Today is September 7th, 2023. If you had heard my encore presentation of last week's show, which aired today on talkradio.nyc at 1 p.m., I said that this week I was going to be coming with a surprise guest. Well, he isn't a surprise for those of you watching the show because he's been here on my 50th episode. He's been here with special guests Ben Lytle and Phyllis Quinlan. He's also been here to help talk about a lot of innovations in medical care. But why is he a surprise guest? Because as you'll hear throughout the hour, we're going to be talking about how the healthcare system and our society at large has gone through a lot of social and financial impacts in terms of the climate change issues that have been arising over the summer months, as well as anything having to do with what I discussed last week with what happened in Maui with the fires that completely destroyed the historic town of Lahaina. Then there is the resurgence of COVID. There's also concerns about what's going to happen in 2024 if certain things happen in our society that a lot of us are not willing to go back to. But that's all left to your interpretation. Again, I am trying to also be very professional with my surprise guest, James Swanson, because he is a professional himself. I'm going to give you his background, but first I want to issue my disclaimer. Due to the fact that this particular episode of Frank About Health is going to really look at financial and social issues, there may be controversial topics discussed. So I want to make it clear that these are not the opinions of NYC or of Frank About Health, but rather the points of view of my guest today, James Swanson, as well as food for thought for you to take into consideration when considering your plans for your own healthcare treatment and advocacy. We are not suggesting that you discontinue any of the treatment protocols you are currently engaged in, or your medicines, or your specialists, or your insurance provider. We're just looking to provide you with food for thought that you can communicate with your friends and family. That all being said, let me introduce James Swanson, first by his background alone. James Swanson is a chartered financial analyst and also was spending over 35 years of his career at MFS Investment Management in Boston, Massachusetts. He is an experienced portfolio manager focused on multi-asset investments. He was a senior vice president there, and he also was an investment strategist there. He has appeared on Bloomberg Television. He's been on CNBC. He's been on NPR. He's also been written up in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. And as I mentioned earlier, he has been a regular contributor to Frank About Health. And so for this reason alone, since I did mention last week that I was back from my hiatus and I wanted to really move forward in the fall with showing my advocacy to all the changes that have occurred, I wanted to have a very frank discussion with James Swanson about the impacts, what his points of view have been, probably insights that I'm unaware of things that we together, not just myself, but also the listeners and viewers out there can do to help contribute to the change that's necessary to help bring back our community, whether it's post-COVID community or the survivors of the Maui fires, or even trying to do what we can to minimize climate change as it continues to progress. Okay, that's a lot of food for thought. James, again, also everyone out there, be aware he's also the father of a very dear friend of mine who has been helpful to me on this show, Danielle Swanson, who has her own podcast, Comfortable Change, available on Spotify. And for this reason, I really consider him not just a colleague and a professional in the healthcare space, especially the portfolio side, but also a dear friend. So that all being said, welcome back, James.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, also, he is a graduate of Harvard University as well as Colgate University. Very well-rounded professional background and a lot of information that I am looking forward to discuss with him. Overall, in the past few months, especially the summer months, what would you say has been the biggest issues that have either surprised you or that you were not anticipating, especially after we've just recovered from 3 years of COVID?
I think one of the things is the resiliency, at least in the near term, of the U.S. economy. We are at a point where most anyone who wants a job can get one. I don't think that will persist. I did think inflation would come back, but the economy is doing very well after COVID. But remember, the German economy is going downward, the UK economy is going downward, and the biggest economy, China, is going downward. So we're in a very good spot, and I hope we can continue that here.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I know, speaking about the economy, one of the biggest pieces of legislation that our current president issued about a year ago is the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, what would be your take in terms of what that act was meant to do in the short term and the long term? I mean, everyone knows that they are now offering insulin for Medicaid recipients and diabetic patients at the rate of $35 each. But what would you say other than that would be some of the short-term benefits of that in relation to the economy as well as healthcare?
Well, you asked about the short-term benefits, and I think it's very similar in a way to the COVID relief packages that were promulgated by the president and passed by the Congress when we went through the epidemic. And it's meant to basically shelter or cushion people who are experiencing high rates of inflation, don't have enough money to pay for medicine, among other things. They're also talking about housing and some other things. And this is the impetus behind it, to make sure people don't fall behind, particularly when it comes to medical care. The problem is it's packaged as inflation relief or trying to maybe do something about inflation. But if inflation's the problem, we have to go back to first principles. What is inflation? And inflation always, in all countries, in all times, is the creation of more money at a faster rate than the amount of goods and services being produced. That creates excess demand. And what these bills now before the Congress and from the president in terms of inflation relief probably will help many people in the near term. In the long term, they don't increase the supply of goods and services. And that leaves us, if inflation's a negative, and I think most people think it is, now we're going to have more inflation down the road. And the question is, how often can you fix something short term and not eventually pay a cost?
Incredible. So is that why you hear all of well, I don't know if it's media driven or even on social media, is that why we hear the controversy over if someone like President Biden should run for re-election, or is that unrelated?
I think that's unrelated. I think the comments about the current president relate to age. I think it's perceptions of ability to execute for age. And because we've seen some people in Congress fail spectacularly in public, I think people are saying, what if this happens to this president? Shouldn't we reconsider? Or shouldn't he? Yeah, I think that's not, I don't think it's an inflation issue.
Okay. So in other words, what we are seeing with the Inflation Reduction Act is that he created a short-term solution coming out of a pandemic with some possible long-term consequences that don't really reflect positively, but it has to be considered in an open mindset that there are other kinds of stipulations or riders, if you will, that can be adjusted in order to minimize the return to inflation over the long term. They just not seeing the long-term vision of the plan. They're just looking at what is immediately changing and what's going to happen overall. But the middle of the road, the gray area, is still unknown to most people, correct?
Right. And if I were fantasizing on the president's advisor and he said to me, is this enough? Is this a good plan? I would say, no, you need to put incentives to increase the supply of goods and services. There's nothing in this that increases the number of physicians or nurses' aides. There's nothing that increases the number of medical facilities to handle the population, and particularly if we go through another round of COVID, and particularly long-term hospice type care centers, there's nothing in this to increase the supply. So if you're increasing the amount of dollars in the system, or shekels, or yuan, or any other currency in a system, and you don't increase the supply of goods and services, the prices will then rise again. And we're experiencing inflation as the result of COVID. and all of the restrictions that happened. And now to fix that, we might be adding to the problem. And I would say, no, let's look at a more balanced approach.
So what would you say that whether it's the COVID-19 pandemic or what life has been like in 2023 when we've all been lifted from all those mandates, what would you say has been the biggest social impact on all of us? Is it just coming out of the pandemic, or is it just not being adjusted to a new normal per se?
I think the number one issue is it has created flexibility in terms of where people work. People with children at home, people that need dual careers, people who don't want to spend 3 hours a day commuting. It relieves the system of that and the tie-up in real estate, which is expensive, all these office buildings. We don't need as many office buildings. Now, it will hurt a financial sector of the economy, namely commercial real estate is being hurt as we speak. But in the long run, it may make people more productive and more flexible in how they conduct their lives. And that's the direct result of COVID.
Wow, that just came to a conclusion, which please correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks as though people in the rental market would be more attractive to businesses, and people in the housing market are more attractive to ownership, like in condominiums and style living. Is that correct?
I think so. But the other issue, in addition to what you've brought up very aptly, is the idea that people can live more remotely. And you might see, and I don't know if we've seen it yet, but we are seeing people move to southern cities even more than we were before COVID, but moving outside the urban areas. And because the urban areas are where the office buildings are concentrated. Well, if you don't need that, and you can get cheaper housing, whether through ownership or rental outside the cities, you will see a migration. I think that's beginning now. And that will be a major social change for a country like the US to adapt to.
Wow. So, I mean, we're about to take our first break, but to close what we've just said, it's a major social change, but do you think that's going to happen like before the end of this year, or will it be a year or two out?
I think it's a process. There are lead and lag times with people making decisions about where they live and how they're going to finance that. But it's a societal change that I don't think is going back. And major tech companies are having trouble bringing people back in the office. They're unwilling to do it. So I think it will be over the next 2 to 3 years, you'll see a shift.
Incredible. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned as we are talking with James Swanson on the social and financial impacts on healthcare as a result of the various changes that we've all gone through, from COVID-19 to the climate and other things that we will discuss later on in the show, right here on talkradio.nyc and on our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn channels. So please stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies, from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on talkradio.nyc Fridays at noon Eastern and intangify your business today.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. We're here with James Swanson, where we just had some insights in terms of what the biggest changes have been as a result of completing the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of us are now looking at changes impacting internal migration, not to mention the migration we hear about on the news of people coming into New York or people coming into California or other places through the border on Texas side or Florida side, and it creating a lot of other kinds of controversy. But one thing that I really have observed over the summer and during my hiatus is our climate is definitely at the point of, it's been coming a long time, but it's at the point of appearing to be disintegrating. Now, that's my point of view based on having witnessed, as we all did, what happened to Lahaina in Maui, here in New York, when we looked like Mars for an entire day or 2 days, when the forest fires smoke was coming over the entire city and turned our entire city orange. And of recent hurricanes in California, which is like the first time in 48 years, not to mention the recent hurricane that just went through Florida and another one that's coming along the way named Hurricane Lee that's at Category 4 at this point. It looks extreme. And what my concern that I want to learn from you, James, to see if I'm onto something, is would you say one of the biggest problems that all of us maybe just didn't do much about or were unprepared for is climate change? Is that what you're seeing to be one of the biggest levers or drivers of the way our ecosystem in healthcare is affecting our society?
Well, it certainly is important. And let me give you one example. The biggest source of wealth for the average American household is their dwelling, their home. And we're seeing insurers pull back from home insurance, which is a form of casualty insurance if something happens to your house, flood, fire, storm, wind damage. Right. And they are now uninsuring whole parts of California, Arizona, Florida, Texas, and saying we can't do this anymore because the cost of these weather changes is too much. We can't suffer that burden. So you'll have to either, insure yourself, which means if you lose your house, they're not going to come through. You don't have an insurance policy. And a lot of people are willing to go without these types of policies. And a lot of people are being taken off them. They're just being forcibly said, we're not going to provide the insurance. Now, when large numbers of people get displaced because of, let's say you mentioned hurricanes, what will happen, they'll turn to the government, and the government, we were talking about inflation before, this all ties together the long-term effects of all of these things, COVID, now climate change, they tie together. The government will step in and say, we'll rebuild your house. We will give you temporary housing and give you food and shelter. But already the debt burden on the US is greater than it was after World War II, when this country rebuilt much of Europe. It was on us to do that. And now you're saying, well, we're having more hurricanes, more fires. The government now, because the private sector won't insure, will now have to be the insurer of last resort. And that adds to the supply of money because the government basically has to tax the populace to pay off the debt to do this. So it's inflationary in the long run. It's not helpful to the economy. And the question people have to ask is there another solution?
Yeah, no, I agree. I could see that from a health perspective, this is definitely impacting mental health issues. But from an economic perspective, if what you're saying is going on, which I believe you, especially in California, other states will follow. I'm sure New York will be one of them, to drop people from their home insurance or their renter's insurance or whatever other liability policies might currently be in play. But that is making me then wonder, when we hear about new healthcare provisions like Medicare Advantage, or even when we hear about new protections that the health system or the hospital systems are doing, does that become just rhetoric, or is that actually an offset for what they're not able to provide for their homes, but at least to guarantee for their individual health protection? I mean, I'm just wondering, how is it that 10, 12 years ago, pre-Obamacare, it was impossible to get an individual policy, and now we have all of these benefits coming in on multiple levels, including improving on senior health benefits, opening up pooled trusts on Medicaid, and of course, CDPAP program, which I've been personally involved with in the care of my cousin. These are things that I thought were impossible, and now they seem to be more readily available. Yet, at the same time, what you just said, as an impact of climate change, when things are being pulled, like the rug being pulled under you, if you're a homeowner, I'm wondering if there's a trade-off going on.
I don't know if it's a direct trade-off, but it's another issue that the government and private industry have addressed, I think, pretty intelligently, and here's why. Mental health seems to be a bigger and bigger problem. We can measure that, and we have better ways of measuring suicidal thoughts, actual suicides among subgroups. We're seeing the number of days outside the work system because of mental health issues, which would be anxiety, depression. These types of mental health disorders are taxing the economy at a tremendous rate. And they were largely uninsured. When I first went into the workforce, you couldn't go to a therapist and ask your medical provider through your company to pay for that. They pay for you have a real physical ailment, you broke your leg, we'll pay for that, but we're not going to pay for you to talk to a therapist. Well, now they will. And it's important because we were losing so many man and woman hours of work in the workforce. It was another drain on the economy. And I think it was correct that both the government, the Medicare system is doing this, and private insurers are at least allowing some benefit and reduce copays for mental health. And it's going to help the economy in the long run because it'll make us more productive.
Incredible. I was just thinking, I mean, obviously as an epileptic patient, I have gone through my own versions of PTSD, among other kinds of anxieties and depression-oriented issues. So I do recall a time when I was seeing a therapist 10 years ago where they only covered like 20 visits or 30 visits and 3 emergency visits. And now my insurance is covering everything at 80%, unlimited visits. And I thought it was because of just Medicare Advantage, but this may actually be the impact of legislation like we mentioned earlier, the Inflation Reduction Act, correct?
Yes.
Keeping in mind what you just said, that mental health has become an outgrowth of everything, that it is now a necessity instead of a commodity.
Yes, I agree with that. And remember, these are related. The rise in mental health issues, particularly among young people, I think they're concerned about what you just mentioned, climate change. And what if there's another pandemic? Or what if they can't control the next pandemic? This is on a lot of people's minds. It's another set of worries.
Right. And is it safe to say that, unfortunately, based on the way our society was pre-COVID, that the communication skills needed to discuss these post-pandemic issues were never formed correctly enough? Or maybe it took podcast platforms like this one to be able to foster those communications that need to happen between parent and child, or spouses, or friends, or even, they talk about social media disease, people getting paranoid and image problems when they look at certain channels that probably are providing misinformation. It's almost like we're not pedaling forward. What's the right word? We're doubling down. We're trying to catch up to where we could have been prior to the pandemic. And now it's even more critical than ever. The communication aspect.
I think you're right, but I don't want to wring my hands because I'm interested in neurology, particularly because of epilepsy. And I'm watching podcasts that I never could do 10 years ago from these neurology departments at Stanford and University of Pennsylvania. And now I'm learning the impact of climate change, of these diseases, of social unrest on the human psyche and the cost it's taking. But now they are addressing it. We're finding ways to make people with epilepsy feel less isolated or not put off in a box somewhere, and people with depression and schizophrenia. We have more intelligent ways of bringing these people into the community, and that's the positive side of it.
We have a comment from Twitch, from Cerebral Wind, and this is a quote. It also doesn't help younger folks. Mental health, when so many members of Congress and government in general are near fossils that don't have our best interests at heart. I know when it comes to our government, a lot of comments are perceptual based, so they're not meant to be our thoughts that we're giving to the public. But what is your take on that comment? I'm in the middle of it. I agree in certain instances, but I also disagree in others.
Well, young people are in a particularly tough spot because there's such a volume of change in their lives. It's very hard to adapt to AI, climate change, pandemics, and social unrest all at once. If you're a young person looking, how do I live my life? And then the older people are still clinging to old ways of thinking about things, the old ways of this is the way we used to do it kind of thing. And I think there should be a younger force in Congress. I would like to see that. And there are 2 young Congress people in my state that are absolutely brilliant. I would love to see people hear more from them.
No, I agree with you, especially on the part of younger people who are really the ones that are even more technically adept than when we were growing up. It's like a reverse system that the pandemic has shifted, where we're now more dependent on the younger set to help give us the technological support, advance through the climate change issues, help with the mental health programs and stuff like that. Although we just have a conundrum going on when you've got a lot of the inexperienced younger set who are really advocating for the past, which didn't work. So that's when I get into my 50-50 split on the younger set. It's like there's got to be some new testing methodology for any of the younger candidates coming into the election cycle that'll be next year, that would also see if they're mentally fit to take on the real challenges rather than be advocates for misinformation, which is what I think we saw in the last prior to Biden. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, interesting. I don't know why people are willing to accept theories rather than always ask for the facts first. I was always trained, get the facts, make sure you know what's true and not true before you establish a belief. But there are lots of people who just wish to believe, things that are told.
And I think I once told you, I believe perception is everything. And therefore, if people are living only on perceptions without the proper knowledge, that's what we have to screen out for. We're about to take another break, but before I do, I'm going to give you another comment that also came from Cerebral Wind. Quote unquote, honestly, we need a lower minimum age to join Congress and an age limit. If you're 70 or over, you shouldn't be allowed to remain in Congress. In other words, I could see him saying that once you've reached 70, then they issue term limits. But keep it the way it is. Like I know in the Senate, it's a 6-year term. And if you're under 70, you can keep reelecting. But once you get to 70, almost like the payout of a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA, when you get to 59 and a half, that's when you can take your distribution.
Right, yeah, yeah.
All right, so thank you for your comments, Cerebral Wind. Please giving more as we proceed through the show. But as I said, we're about to take our next break. So please stay tuned right here on Frank About Health, on Twitch, on Facebook, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn, and on talkradio.nyc. We will be back in a few.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
In a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will be frank about health to advocate for all of us.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
We know there's a real potentialist. Her name is Ann Padori at Children's Hospital. She's raising zebrafish in her lab, and she is interjecting genetic mutations into her fish. They live 3 years. So in 12 years, you get 4 generations of these fish. She's focusing on epilepsy, and Frank is very experienced with that particular affliction, what it does to 2% of humanity. But now they're finding with CRISPR, they can edit the gene makeup of these fish. And if they could do this with human beings to alter Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's isn't necessarily a genetic disease, but it has a genetic component, and other types of dementia. And if we all have to save the money it takes to live a high quality of life, without technology, I would be discouraged, but I'm excited about what I'm reading, about what I'm hearing, and I've met some of these people. And one more I just want to throw out there, and then Phyllis and Ben jump in. fMRI, which is functional magnetic resonance machines, they're now watching how the hippocampus lights up when fear occurs, or someone makes a use of a word in a political statement that's negative and causes you to vote a certain way. The amygdala or the hippocampus lights up. It's crude now, but what is happening in that field of neurology is beginning to shed light on how our brains and biases work. And if we can educate people that they have inherent biases, or there are things that light up in their brain without their conscious awareness, and make it conscious, we will have a better life out there, and companies are jumping on this. So there is hope, and I want to leave a hopeful word there and let you two jump in.
That was your last appearance on Frank About Health. I think we recorded that show and aired it around Thanksgiving time last year, 2022, but it was insightful, especially the quote when you're talking about the technology and innovation that is going to actually create more impacts into the way we're trying to recover from the pandemic and deal with issues like mental health and climate change. And of course, there was the reference to epilepsy. I know you're interested in neurological illness. So I just wanted to say, I think you were just as much the potentialist on that show as our special guest that night, Ben Lytle, was. And I'm very interested to know here, 10 months later, since that appearance, are you seeing a lot of what you said back then coming to light today?
Yes, it's gotten even better. We haven't cured Alzheimer's or epilepsy, as you know, but the advances continue to come out of these fields. And it's, when we talked about fMRI and lighting up parts of the brain, but now they're going in with different types of call it electronic sensors that they're placing in the brain, where they can not only find where for example, seizures come from, but find out exactly what the synapses are that are causing depression or schizophrenia. And they're finding that synapses are little tiny computers that communicate with the neurons. And now they're being able to break that down and saying, this is where the malfunction is. We're within a few years of fixing a lot of this because now we can look into the synapses. And this is exciting stuff. Science is giving us a new world. It's not tomorrow, but it's day by day it's happening.
Right. What was unique about Ben Lytle's appearance on the show is he said that it was happening right then and there, even though, of course, in discussing his book and the show, he said this was going to be happening over the years coming. But the fact is, most people, and this is my own opinion, really, in terms of why younger set or even the older set is not willing to change as easily enough, or because of fear, or because they're in a mindset that is unchangeable at that point, or the younger set, they don't have all of the information they need to foster that change. It's a constant idea of living with perception and hypothesizing about the future while making references to the past, but not living in the moment. And I think technology is helping people to live in the moment, because we all know, like even doing the show, this is right now live. And we can have our real refreshing thoughts and ideas and communication happen regardless of what we discussed prior to the show. The thing is that what I'm interested to know is that still the missing element, which is creating all of the mental deficits that people are feeling, whether it's the depression, the anxiety, or PTSD?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the origin of this rise in mental disorders, let's call it, but they are getting more information and more studies are being done on the effect of social media on people's, not only their behavior, but their mental state. The idea that they're always being compared to an ideal when you're just fine as who you are. But if you're constantly looking at what a perfect meal or perfect body so-and-so has, and you're fed that 8 hours a day, you begin to feel like there is something wrong with you. And this is happening on a massive scale. And the way social media allows people to say nasty things without looking someone in the face right there and then in the room, they can get away with it. They're in San Francisco and you're in Beijing. And these nasty forums are affecting people's mental state too. And we never had this kind of organized, massive, on-demand nastiness, verbal attacks, and general unease and unfavorable comparisons. You always in high school compare yourself to the cool kids on the football team or the cheerleaders, but now people are telling you you're not as good as everyone else 8 hours a day. It's got to be taking its toll.
Right. And even just from what you said alone, when people became used to living their lives virtually, like on Zoom during the pandemic, there was the loss of human connection that after repeated constant distancing from family and friends and loved ones and whatever, just coming back to that, it's almost like a foreign interaction. I don't want to use that term loosely. I don't mean foreign as in another country or another ethnic group, but it's like the ability to connect has been frayed or has been disjointed. And that might also be a trigger for the exacerbating mental health issues and suicidal ideation, and not to mention gun violence, which in itself is another topic. But for our world, forgetting the climate now, for our world to be in continual organized disarray, I can see how artificial intelligence comes into the play to stabilize things, but then there's the what if Is it going to replace me? Is it going to give me the truth? Is it going to make me look like a plagiarist? So the reality testing seems to be sorely lacking after what we have just gone through and what we are continuing to go through in the area of our environment and in the area of trying to create better change in Congress. Where do we go? It's like we all have to start with ourselves, which I always say on the show, start with yourself. But I believe everyone now should also be totally in tune with their own therapist, their own reflector, so that they know that they're going forward correctly and not with the confusion of whatever the media is saying or whatever technology is saying or whatever your past has told you. I'm frank about health. I've talked about narcissism on several occasions, and I had discovered that in my life, which is why I talked about it on the show. But that might have been a rise due to the restriction in connecting with each other. And that might be fundamentally now what's driving all of the confusion in our society. I know it's a big impact that obviously will take its time, but I think one thing that I hope everyone learns to do somehow is learn to live in the moment as best as possible, because we don't know what's going to change and when. It's not going to be 6 months from now anymore. It's like 6 days from now. You would agree that the speed of change has increased as well, hasn't it?
I think it has, yeah. Very, almost measurably, yes.
What would you say has been, in your discussion, both on that show that I just showed, as well as in your research, the correlation between the mental health changes and neurological health? Would you say that there are segments that are combining the two, or is it just social issues that have driven the mental health predominantly?
Social issues have driven the awareness that mental health is equally important as the body's health, and they're intertwined. This idea that we have a body and a mind, two separate things, is pretty much gone now in current society. And we realize that we need both. And I think that's the big change that's going on. But how do we prepare people? For example, let's tie another thing together. We're talking about the effects on the economy of people working remotely. But now they're finding the lack of socialization affects their oxytocin levels and their dopamine, and that we do need socialization. And it's not the same in video. If you're on a work Zoom, it's not the same as actually being in the room or even with your therapist. They're finding that we're because we've done everything remotely, or not everything, we're doing more things. We're also losing that day-to-day social in-person contact, which is having another mental health effect on people. So we have to be aware of the changes are compounding each other. Yes.
Right. Well, we're about to take another break, but Cerebral Wind over at Twitch made another comment, and then I will close with that, and we'll address it when we return. He says, not only would the above help more younger representation, but people like Mitch McConnell, who is very obviously not doing too hot in the health department right now, if his last 2 public appearances are anything to go by, would be out of Congress to receive the health care they need to relax in their later years. The irony in that comment is that it combines mental health and neurological health, because when looking at his moments on camera, I couldn't tell if they were strokes or seizures or I think TBI or TIM, or I forgot the acronym.
I think it's TIA.
TIA, thank you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have a lot of people, a lot of his advocates saying that he's recovering from a fall that he took months ago. But I'm sure there are neurons that are short-circuiting after a concussion like that. And we'll just explore that comment a little bit more when we return. So please stay tuned, everyone, right here on Frank About Health, both on talkradio.nyc and on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We will be back in a few.
What really drives success in business? Introducing Intangify, the show that explores the intangible assets that create value and growth. I'm Matthew Asbell, your host and an attorney focused on innovation. Join me Fridays at noon Eastern to discover how innovation, culture, and other intangibles shape thriving companies from startups to established businesses. We'll share strategies to unleash your business's true potential. Tune in live on talkradio.nyc Fridays at noon Eastern and intangify your business today.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. And again, I'd like to thank Cerebral Wind for making the commentary help our conversation over the last 45 minutes. I don't know who you really are other than by your handle, but I could see that you're really on point with regards to both the neurological and mental health issues of our society today. COVID-19, climate change, and other social issues that we were talking about during this last 45 minutes have definitely impacted us all, regardless of what your neurological health is. I'm coming from the place of epilepsy, but the average everyday person is dealing with their own mental health issues as a result of what it was like to be disconnected from each other. We're not wired for that. We're not programmed for that. However, I think with technology and the innovation that it has taken us towards, as well as a lot of the commentary that James had discussed in terms of what we can do to close that loop and making sure that the next 5 years, for example, is going to be more seamless or is going to be leading us in the right direction. And hopefully we don't make the same mistakes that we did 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But in my view, it's learning to live in the moment, which I don't feel most people do. Again, that's just my opinion. Cerebral Wind, we were talking about Mitch McConnell and the whole abstract nature of his condition. Yes, everyone could say he's too old to still be in Congress. He should leave office in 2026 or 2025, I think is his next election. I'm not even sure which, 2026 rather. But it's interesting how we don't know what the neurological problem he's dealing with. And I don't think we're ever going to get a concrete assessment. There is something called HIPAA, so even his doctors would not disclose that if it's considered private information. We can all infer what it is, and of course we all have the power in our voting to make a decision if we want someone to be reelected or in office again. But the thing is that if you compare that to individuals who literally have been in worse mental condition, who knows, maybe Mitch McConnell should not be leaving office, but then again, that's hearsay and that's perceptual, and that's up to the individual voter. I think all of us are to be judged on how we connect with each other, whether it's virtually or in real time, in person. If we all are dealing with a form of collective PTSD, that has to be made aware to everyone up front, so that when you are being as transparent as possible, people can look at the deficits in your thinking or the stress or anxiety levels that you have and keep that in mind and not construe you or perceive you as not professional enough or not significant enough in whatever you are communicating with the people in the room at that time. This is my way of closing out the show by reminding everybody out there that over the last 45 minutes, by James and I having a conversation and educating all of you out there about the financial and social impacts that our society has gone through due to the pandemic and climate change and artificial intelligence, take ownership over your perceptions, your mind, your education, your knowledge, your people that you can turn to. As I said, get a therapist if you just want to do reality testing and move forward with your life. It's in your hands. It's your life. You have the power to do so. That's never really communicated except on one-on-one situations. But I'm hoping that both James and I were able to bring awareness to all of you out there that you have the choice and you have the power to use whatever weaknesses you have and turn them into strengths going forward. The other thing that I wanted to do, because if you remember on last week's show, I had shown episodes of shows that featured Dr. Mira Brancu and also featured Maurice Elkovich with the Maury method, but you couldn't hear sound. And the reason why I want to give them their due and play it again is because one of them will be my guest next week and one of them has their podcast tomorrow. So let me just do them the respect and then also wrap up with, things that I, along with other members of talkradio.nyc, will be involved in over the coming weeks. So first appearance will be
that's entrainment. Everyone can be trained unless you have some physical issue with your brain. But like 99% of the people get entrained every day anyway. It's just a different type of entrainment. So the idea is that I expose you to these frequencies. Your brain then, the idea is that your brain follows these frequencies and hopefully the reestablishment of the connection brings the reestablishment of natural processes that will clean it out. That's my way of doing things. Now, that being said, these are bone conduction headphones. They don't go in the ear. I'm going the wrong way. They go into the little fleshy area over top of the ear, the bone, and they vibrate more than the speaker because everything is vibration. No one's hearing you or I speak, Frank. What's happening is, and if everyone knows where their speakers are on their computers or their phones, put your finger over while I'm talking now, and you'll feel vibration.
Right.
That's what talk is. It's vibration. That's what any sound is. It's vibration. And that vibration gets interpreted by the brain as sound, what we call sound. So
okay, and there was also another reason why I wanted to show that again. I am wearing those very headphones right now, and I just realized that when I took them off, you could still hear me. Now, I could tell you, in having my conversation with James over the last 45 minutes and hearing him crisp and clear without them being in my ear, I felt that this conversation was not only extremely educational, but also brought to me some insights that I didn't already know. I believe that what Maurice said is true, that whenever you are dealing with mental and neurological problems, especially when recovering from what we've just lived through, having this kind of adaptation in the way you communicate virtually, or even the way you hear your music or have a phone call on your handset, is actually going to create a calm within your system so you can learn to live in the moment. If those of you who saw that episode on Frank About Health a couple months ago, it was actually regarding my cousin who's been now diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And he was saying his sound files can be readily available to any of you out there to listen to the vibration that can help the amyloid proteins in your brain reduce in nature and hopefully minimize the amount of potential dementia or Alzheimer's disease that you can get in your later years. They also help with people who have insomnia from sleeping. They help in boosting mood in case you're depressed. They also might, although I don't know this for certain, they might also minimize the chance of epileptic seizures. They also create positive confidence and elevation of happiness and other kinds of things. It's a whole library of samples that Maury has provided to me. So if any of you out there are looking for samples, please email me at frankrharrison1@gmail.com, and I will get them to you right away, especially if you've seen this kind of commercial on this episode of Frank About Health. In addition, these headphones, you have to get them on Amazon.com. That does not come with the program. Overall, I see I'm about 2 minutes to end. So I will show the other soundbite, and then I will say farewell to you, James, for giving us your education and your knowledge about the impacts. But remember, everyone, tomorrow's Friday, and our slate of shows begins at 10 o'clock with Tommy D and Philanthropy in Focus. At 11, it's Always Friday with Steve Fry. At 12 noon, it's Intangify with Matthew Asbell. And then at 1 p.m., it's The Hard Skills with Dr. Mira Brancu. And this is exactly what she said on the show that I played back last week.
The best organizations have already found and already know the research that is out there about the bottom line outcomes when you have a more diverse workforce and when you support them, appropriately, and when you recruit for a more diverse workplace, and when you have the right policies in place and structure in place to support them, which is that they do better than all other organizations, 20% better often, for some of the best organizations that can do this right. And so, I think ultimately, and they also know that workers at this point have a choice. They can work where they feel they are most supported. And people are starting to walk away with their feet from organizations that do not support them and do not create a healthy work environment. And work.
I have seen all of her episodes so far. She literally is the perfect way to end this particular show. Listening to The Hard Skills is a new way to improve on your mental health. Possibly if you have a neurological issue. Diversity in the workplace that she refers to is disability focused or neurologically focused, as well as gender focused. But at the same time, we are all dealing with differences in our culture and in our society after the COVID-19 pandemic, dealing with climate change, the ongoing uncertainty happening in 2023, with the rest of 23 into 24. Also, there is a program that I will be launching around November, December, right here on Frank About Health, that is going to raise funds for the people of Maui. More on that over the next 9 weeks. James, do you have any comments? I think I took over this whole segment.
No, I'd like to end with, it would be easy, since we've talked about AI taking jobs and pandemics and climate change and neurological problems, but it would be easy to fall into despair and not do anything. 6 miles from where I live right now, where I'm talking to you, the mRNA vaccine and breakthroughs occurred just 3 years ago that are attacking the COVID worldwide, saved millions of lives worldwide. Change is happening. The unemployment rate in the US among young Blacks is now below the unemployment rate of young males, white males. Change is happening. There's hope out there. Don't give up and live in the moment.
Awesome. Perfect end. Again, everybody, thank you for staying tuned in this episode of Frank About Health with my surprise guest, James Swanson. James has been an advocate for me and a mentor in certain ways. And again, Sam, you have also been a mentor. I am always thanking you at this point, because a lot of what I'll be doing on this network and on this show in the coming weeks are going to benefit all of us in what we're trying to do right here on talkradio.nyc. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for tomorrow's slate of shows, and I'll be back next week with Maury Zelkovich. That will be next week's guest. James, I will call you in a few, and we're signing off now. Take care. Thanks again, Dylan, for your help, and see you next week.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate,